Good morning. Happy Friday. Just going to let people get into the Zoom room here, and then we will get started.
Good morning, BJ.
Hey, Dani. Good to
Nice
see
to
you
see your
again.
face on a Friday morning.
Nice to see yours as always. Beaut. I love doing these with you, Dani. So good.
Oh, you say that to everybody, but I do love doing these with you too.
I really love doing these with
Especially.
you. All right. Well, guys, maybe I'll start the little intro-y thing here while people are
Yeah,
coming
go for it.
in. Yeah, so hi everybody. New faces or new folks. No, we don't know faces really, but no folks, welcome. These are things we do maybe a couple times a month, meant to be just really open dialogue. I mean, we can go many places. Dani and I will start, and I'll introduce you to Dani in a second, but Dani and I will start. We'll go through some slides, kind of get some concepts out there, and then we'll get to the fun part, which is conversation with you guys. So questions and all that stuff will come up. Sonia will talk about that in a moment. But just one thing to say is this is a safe place. So we talk about subjects that can be very emotional or loaded or personal. So all feelings welcome. So yeah, think and feel wherever you want to go, and you don't have to speak up, but you're welcome to speak up too. So Sones, how about some mechanical details for us?
Absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So as BJ mentioned, he and Dani are going to talk through some aspects to level set today. And then after that, we get to your questions and comments and thoughts. And you can do that in a couple ways. You can click on the raise hand button and we will unmute you on this end and you can ask your question aloud to Dani and BJ. Or if you prefer not to do that, you can type it into the Q&A section and I will read it aloud for you. So two options of how you can interact. And the chat is also open if you want to just shoot any thoughts or feelings or reactions in there as well. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Sonia. And yet again, you guys will see lovely slide deck. One of the 2 million things on Sonia's plates is to come up with images for these things, and I love them always. Okay, so Dani Chammas, a lot of you guys undoubtedly have heard of Dani one way and another out there. Dani is a psychiatrist and a palliative care doc. I've known Dani for a long time, lucky me, since she was about this tall. Not really, a long time. And for my betterment in all ways. So, Dani, welcome back. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a
Um,
treat for me. It's always a treat for me.
well, goody. All right. Well, we're going to jump into something pretty heady, but we're going to try to not stay heady. Dialectics. It's a word some of us may have heard, maybe not. So, this, Dani, you and I both have this sort of shared philosophical kind of angle in our lives, as well as this sort of psychological. And this subject, hopefully, will be able to bridge the two. So, why don't we just start with trying to define what the heck dialectics are, or what is
I
the
guess it depends on who you talk to, right?
right, for sure.
Um, I would say, like, in my mind, if I'm trying to most simply define a dialectic, it's two things that are seemingly opposing, right? Seemingly opposing, but both are actually true. Neither one negates the other one. I don't know. What's
Yeah.
your simple?
Well, so I wish. So I learned this word through the philosophical world, specifically Hegel. And I'm no big, most everything I have ever learned about philosophy is actually filtered through my dear old friend Justin Burke, whom you should meet some point, Dani. He's a trip, and he's brilliant, and he's many things. But he's taught me all sorts of things about philosophy, specifically Hegel. And he's taught me a little bit about the dialectic, which is that word is philosophically associated with Hegel. So early 19th century, late 18th century German philosopher, who's complicated. I tried reading a little bit of his stuff and whoa. But if I understand the philosophical argument around the dialectic, it is what you just said, Dani, but a little bit more specifically. And we can see if the philosophical of this particular specificity has any bearing therapeutically. But quoting my friend Justin, essentially, the dialectic is specific to any one thing possesses its own undoing, its doing and its undoing. So if you look at life as a dialectic, death is part of life. It's inclusive of. So I, as a living being, by virtue of being alive, I also contain my death, my undoing. So it is a sort of a negation in a sense. In that way, it is the thing containing its opposite simultaneously, or something like that.
No, I think you're pointing out sort of that there's often a polarity, right? One needs the other to actually exist. And I remember when Deb and Karen came on for one of these, it was a really fun session. I remember Deb making the comment that one of the most beautiful things for her is that she had been working the land, right? Like she'd done a lot of farming, a lot of working the land. And so it felt so ingrainedly true to her that it wasn't life or death, that it was that life needs death and death needs life, and neither one exists without the other. And so she felt very in touch with that, that piece of things. So I think that is a part of it.
Right on.
So and I would think from you're talking philosophy, but from the psychological world, and again, we don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole before we get practical today, but I think it was really Marsha Linehan who really brought the dialectics to the forefront of sort of psychology and therapy. And she started dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, which a lot of people have probably heard of, but I think it was born from this desire. She felt like patients were getting pathologized and that there was this message that they were wrong or broken or not good enough. So she wanted to form a therapy where people could accept themselves for just who they were in the moment. And yet when she just focused on that side, she found that it took people off the hook for responsibility and accountability. And so she formed her therapy around this central dialectic that we can accept exactly who we are in the moment, and we can strive to change and grow and be better. And that it's not either or, that we can do both of those at once. We can have space for both of those at once. And I think since then, dialectics have found their way across so many different therapies and parts of psychology, but she really stands out for me as one of the people who put a spotlight.
Right on. And we'll circle back to that theme, how there's nothing wrong with you for containing these simultaneously opposing views or feelings. And there's nothing pathological about that. In fact, that's actually very, very human. That's an essential leap, because otherwise we're going to be at odds with ourselves or parts of ourselves all the time, which many of us are. And that's why I think this kind of therapeutic modality, this conversation can open us up, exactly as you just pointed. So, okay, so dialectics. So we can think about Hegel if we'd like. We can circle back there, but I think we're all in the ballpark.
Yeah.
One way and another. So Dani, I mean, sometimes it gets framed. Sometimes a lot of people are talking about duality and they'll throw the word dialectic in there as though they're kind of synonymous. I think I hear people moving between them, and they're very much not. They're very not synonymous. They're importantly different.
They're importantly different.
Yeah.
I think dialect, as opposed to this dualistic thinking, is quite different, right? Dualistic thinking is rooted in comparison and differentiating, right? It's either or. Something is good or bad. Something is right or wrong, right? And in the Western world, we are very, very enticed by dualistic thinking. And I just want to say up front, a lot of positive things have come from dualistic thinking, right? It's not an evil thing. Anybody out there who's listening, please keep stopping at red lights and going at green lights. Do not tell the police officer that BJ Miller and Dani Chammas told you that the light was both green and red. But no, a lot of a lot of scientific discoveries, a lot of things have come from dualism. But it just can't be the only lens through which we view the world, because some things are either or, but a lot of things are both and, right?
Amen. That's such a perfect example. And talking with Justin, Dr. Burke, again, I was asking about the sort of philosophical history. Like, so dualism often is associated with Descartes and Cartesian thinking, subject, object. There's me and there's you, and we are different. We are separate. And dualism is a philosophy of separation, which can be very helpful, as you say. It's this, not that. That can be very helpful to move through daily life. But what I think in talking this through, you start seeing dualism as not a piece of truth necessarily, but almost as en route to the dialectic. Like, when you're a kid, there isn't a lot of separation. You're not thinking subject, object. You learn that over time. And I'm talking to one of the greatest mothers of all time. I should defer to you here, but I'm assuming as a kid that they have to learn separation, that they're different from other things, that there's some difference between them and this cup or another person or whatever else, this differentiation, like you said, and that's very helpful. But over time, it seems like one of the things we unlearn is that there's so much separation between ourselves and others. I think we land in a very lonely place if we stay dualistic in our thinking. So it's almost that duality is almost like a convention, a way of kind of finding a way of orienting as an individual in this world to help you understand what you aren't on some level. And that ultimately, maybe at death, maybe with old age, maybe with personal growth, you start undoing all the separation that can be so lonely making and can make it sound like the world could exist as such without any one piece of it, which we know isn't true ultimately. If we take any one little thing out of the world, it's a different world, maybe imperceptibly, but truly a different world. Like we get to be this drop in the ocean, but it wouldn't be the same ocean without our little drop. So
it's actually one of my favorite dialectics out there, right? Like I am deeply important and I'm a speck in the universe.
Right on.
So true. What a great dialectic. I love that one. But you sound so sophisticated when you talk about philosophy, BJ, and I kind of love it. But really, I mean, this stuff is harder to do than it sounds, right? And I think part of our job in palliative care is to work with people and help make space in the room and with somebody for both parts of a dialectic to be held, to be in contact with both in tandem. And now that you're talking about childhood, I'm going to share with you a story from when I was a kid that I think touches on this dualism idea. But for anybody who doesn't know this, if you didn't guess it, I was a pretty anxious kid. I was like convinced I was going to be convicted of a crime I didn't commit and things like that. But I found this journal not long ago that I wrote in, BJ, and there was one day in my childhood where I was upset with my mom, my wonderful mom, about something, and I wrote about it. I said, I'm so frustrated with her. Like, how could she do this? Ugh, I'm so mad. And then when you flip the page, there's maybe like 20 following pages saying like, but if I were to die and somebody were to find this journal, I want to be really clear that I love my mother and she's really wonderful and she's done a lot for me and I appreciate her, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that what my anxious childhood brain was scared of was that somebody would pick it up and they would be really thinking in this dualistic mindset and they would see that and say, oh, this was an ungrateful kid. This was a kid that didn't love their mother. This was a kid that, was angry. They wouldn't be able to hold the dialectic that I both loved my mother dearly and she really frustrated me sometimes, right? That both of those were true. Sorry, you talk about philosophy, I talk about my childhood.
Oh, it's perfect. So good. So good and so tender, picturing you terrified that someone was going to find the diary without the next 20-page apology. It's so adorable.
Insight into the brain of Dani.
It's a magical place in there. Okay, well, shall we move on for now?
Let's move on. Yeah, I think we were hoping that we could brainstorm some of the common dialectics that we come in contact with a bunch in palliative care. There are 100 swimming in my brain, so maybe we'll just go back and forth thinking about some of the ones we see a lot. And we talked about, I think, the most central fundamental one, like this living and dying, right? It's huge. It's around us all the time. And it's not the case, right? That I am the doctor and I am living and, you are the sick patient and you are dying, because whether we're in touch with it or not, we are all living and we're all dying, right? Every single breath I take is both a breath of life and a breath closer to death, right? So, and I don't know about you, BJ, but I feel like I feel this dialectic bubble up a lot in palliative care when people are transitioning to hospice. I just had a patient yesterday. Everybody around him was telling him, it's time. It's time for this transition. And he said to me, if I transition to hospice, that means I'm dying. And we spent the whole appointment talking about the fact that hospice, in many ways is about living. It's about making sure that his living experience is the best that it can be, that it can't be about one or the other. It has to be about both, but I don't know.
That's a classic one. You're right. It comes up a lot in our field. And it's one that makes me, well, it summons all sorts of feelings, including, gosh, we got to find our language in this. Got to find a way to talk about these things because we, not going too far down this rabbit hole, and we've talked about it on other webinars, that the beauty of the hospice benefit and part of the problems with, it is structured to be this fork in the road. We language it as a fork in the road. So we don't do ourselves any service oftentimes, especially in the medical lingo. But it's not just medicine. It's all over the place. We just keep ramming ourselves into either ors. And that's a big one of real consequence to hospice. That's not a small point. Without that conversation with you, or maybe even with that conversation with you, this person may still keep hospice at bay and suffer way more than they need to. And keeping hospice at bay does not mean he won't die. In fact, the data would suggest he might die even sooner without hospice. So anyway, there's a lot of consequence to some of these modes of thinking. As you're pointing, Dani, it's not just interesting, they're very consequential, how we feel about ourselves in the world, et cetera. So anyway, yes, that's a doozy. This alone and connected one, that's one of our time. We are in touch with so many people all the time and yet feeling so lonely. Wow. That's a contemporary one.
And it's, both sides are true, right? Our journey is our own. Nobody will walk in our shoes. And sometimes there's something beautiful about that. Sometimes there's something really lonely about that. And we're bonded by humanity, right? We all know joy. We all know sorrow. We all know death, right? So many of our patients are walking these really unique paths and they're surrounded by community. They are both alone and connected. Sorry, I could spend an eternity in any one of these.
Please do. They're so rich. And again, there's therapy waiting for us to be reminded that you don't have to choose, that you get to be both. This is, again, it's not just fun thoughts. Strong, vulnerable.
You go.
No, I was just saying the strength, vulnerable one. So one thing to say here is not only do we contain multitudes, including things that might feel opposing, but I think there's another layer too, that the seeming opposites in us are foils for the other. So the idea that we die can help us appreciate that we're alive. Try summoning, you will never find out how strong you are until you experience vulnerability. You will not really be able to understand or perhaps appreciate joy unless you've felt sorrow. So it's not that we contain these multitudes. They can unlock each other in some way, or at least unveil the experience of the other.
Totally. And I think we've all worked with people who, we see this one a lot, who've been fiercely independent in their life, right? They've done everything for themselves. I have a patient in my clinic just like this right now, and it feels intolerable to her to accept help because it feels like that means she's weak. That means she went from strong to weak. And we spend a lot of time, on this dialectic of we can simultaneously be fiercely strong and very vulnerable at once. It's like the willow tree, deeply rooted and totally swayed by the wind all at once.
Right on.
I think one of the ones we see a bunch in palliative care too is this one of hope and despair. When I think when people have a serious illness, it can be so tempting to live in just one of those. And my friend and colleague, Carrie Brenner, she was talking to me the other day about how she thinks one of the very hardest things we're asking our patients to do is to simultaneously hold the dialectic of living well while acknowledging the severity of their illness. without getting lost in either one of those alone. It's not an easy thing to be in contact with both of those at once. So
Yeah,
there's a million.
there's a million, but you're also making me think of just how we live with the dialectic. I mean, for me, it's a work in progress of just constantly reminding myself it's not an either or, it's both and. I mean, it's very simply put. And I have to keep reminding myself. There's a lot of, perhaps there's unlearning in me. But that does take, I do need to be reminded. And as you just said, it's not like sometimes my version of that is toggling between. I'm happy. No, I'm sad. Like I think the real, that I can be both, but it's sort of one at a time.
Yeah.
That's I think that is my brain trying to kind of harness, control it, keep it kind of tidy. The truth is, what I'd like to get to is I get to be both simultaneously. I can move fluidly between them, but also
you want to be the Buddha.
Yeah, that sounds fun. He gets to be fat and happy. That sounds delightful, and he gets to sit around. But yeah, no, I mean,
it's true. It would be an enlightened place to be.
Yes,
it's a really good point. Like, we're presenting it as these almost like these beautiful ideas, of balance and enlightenment, but this is hard. Like, this is really hard, and some are harder than others. So if we want to go deep into the psychology of Dani, agency and powerless, I have been working on being in touch with that dialectic for 40 years now. I can't do it, right? There's a lot out of our control. We don't know if the scans are going to be better or worse. That's not up to us. And there's so much in our control when we think about how we live every day. And back to my childhood, my mother, you would love her, BJ, but she used to smoke cigarettes when I was little. And I remember I would take her cigarettes and throw them away. She probably lost so much money. I would flush them down the toilet and tell her, Mom, you're going to kill yourself. This is so bad. This is so bad. And she would, like the Cheshire Cat, she would take a puff of the cigarette, blow a ring in my face and go, my destiny is my destiny, sweetie. What will come will come. Right. And so in like the utter reaction to a mother like that, I ended up being this kid who like became a doctor to fix things, and my kids only eat organic and we don't microwave plastic, and I have this like false sense of control over the world, whereas reality is somewhere, I was going to say somewhere between what we both represented, but it's probably like the reality contains both.
All of it.
Both of it. And I cannot for the life of me be in touch with both sides of this dialectic.
Yeah, I'm with you. And this is a work in progress. This is a life's work getting there. If that is what enlightenment is, yeah, very cool. It sounds, I just want to stop being at odds with myself all the time on some level. That's what I'd like. That's what I'm looking for here. Slightly different definition of enlightenment. But yeah, God, you said another thing that reminded me. Oh, it's just going to reflect on my mom's own smoking. It used to bother me too. But I also kind of thought it was kind of cool. I was mixed about it. And so my way of dealing with it was do you remember those little explosive tips you could put in the end of a cigarette? So when she lit it and it blew up?
No, that was not a part of my childhood.
Oh, that was really mean. I used to do it not infrequently. Poor mom. Sorry, Mom, if you're here. Anyway, slightly different tangent. Okay. Well, should we move on?
Well, okay, a couple more.
Okay.
Because I see this one a lot in play, like same versus different. Like, am I same or am I different? And they're like, again, for anybody out there struggling with a serious illness, they're both true, right? You're the same mother, the same friend, the same whatever it is that you always were. And you have likely been deeply transformed, or as Karen likes to allude to sometimes, broken apart and glued back together from the same substance. We didn't fabricate you from something new. You're the same and different.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's a good one. Loss and growth, right? You, BJ, always talk about some of the beauty that gets learned from being ill. And I think there's a fear that if I talk about what I've learned or gained from my illness, does that negate all of my loss? It doesn't. It's still there.
Yeah, sometimes I hear myself with that one and I think I sound Pollyannish. I just have to remind myself I'm just talking about a piece of that spectrum.
You're just talking about one side of a
Yeah. I don't want to fetishize loss. No, loss is great. You'll grow from it. It's a beautiful. It's not ugly. You know, yeah.
Yeah. And but I think the reason you can, I don't want to say get away with it, the reason you can do it is because even when you're speaking to that side, we feel that you're holding space for the entirety of the dialectic. We don't feel like you're closing off one side to speak to one side. So, and then for any caregiver out there, I feel like you've probably felt the, grateful and frustrated dialectic, right? If I say caregiving is exhausting, if I say I just need a beep, like break from my loved one because they're driving me nuts, does that mean I'm not grateful? Does that mean I don't love them and it's not so meaningful for me to care for them? No, they're not mutually exclusive. So I will stop because I could go on forever.
Well, there's too many. Although you're making me think of another one that's just worth noting because some of these are very specific and come up in the context of the work we do and the stuff we're talking about. One that just I feel would be helpful to name here, and you're right, it's endless, but because it can have such a what's the word here? Well, there's a lot of fallout to this, some of these feelings that can feel really naughty or cruel, or like one that comes up not infrequently is with families, particularly after maybe where someone is dying and it may be particularly protracted fashion, and it can be very tiring, it's just exhausting for everybody. Certainly, Lord knows the dying person. But I've talked to families and they're so devoted and love this person, and death comes and there's no piece of them that wants the person to die, and yet there is a piece of them that wants
relieved. They're sad and relieved.
Exactly. That's a doozy, and I really want to name it because it can that thought or feeling can be terrifying to someone who is filled with love for somebody.
That's such a good one, right? Because I too have seen someone torture themselves over this thought. What does it mean? I'm relieved that they died. Does that mean I'm horrible?
Yeah.
Right? No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. You can be so sad and relieved. Both.
Yes. Yep.
Good one, BJ. Way to throw in a great one at the end there.
Thanks, Dani. It's hanging off you. But like this also gets at, and maybe this is a good entry to the next slide. Or did you want to go on and on and on about this one?
I should probably be reined in.
We'll circle back because maybe you guys out in the audience might have some favorites to share too. So undoubtedly we'll probably circle back to this one. But what I was going to go is kind of getting at this, which is like we're talking, one of my responses as a human being around this stuff has been to be very suspicious of words, because anytime we pick a word, that becomes it. Like that's what you are.
Yeah.
I'm tired, or I'm frustrated. Okay, great. Now I'm an angry guy. That's all I am. You put the word there, and there's like back to Hegel, there's a word like sublation, which is like the second you name it, you pick it, it's kind of frozen in time, and then it's sort of, that's all it is. And so anytime it's why we need to be so careful with language, because we get these labels, and then that's who we are, it feels, or what we can project onto each other. And I see this a lot in our work of like people, a lot of, I think, moving with realities of illness and death are finding your way to being interested in change and transformation and motion and evolution and becoming. And I've just watched a lot of folks get sort of frozen on identities within certain dynamics. Oh no, that's dad, he never cries. Or that's mom, she's overly, that's it. So if dad cries, people freak out. It's like, and I watch, the funny guy has to always be funny, or just we get stuck. And it's one of my reactions has just been really suspicious and playful with language to kind of push back on its power a little bit. So anyway, that's something to get into.
And it's so interesting as you talk about this, and this just sort of idea of being labeled or pigeonholed or defined is that it's there's two parallel processes. Like there's the external and the internal, right? I think on some level we're all scared that one facet of our experience will be seen by the outside world and we will be viewed as just that. If I come into my doctor's office and complain about how hard scheduling was, am I going to be viewed as, ungrateful, as difficult, as that's, that is the entirety of me. But I think there's this other really internal piece of how we can label ourselves, right? If I'm in contact with this feeling, what is the narrative I tell myself about myself because of it? If I felt anger, if I felt hate, like how might I accidentally label myself on the inside, which is such a different mindset. And this might get to the next side, but then giving ourselves, the freedom to sort of, or the liberation that comes with taking this more dialectical way of thinking, right? Creating the space for things to just be parts of our identity, pieces of our identity, pieces of our experience, that are part of a much greater whole, right? That hopefully puts us in contact with a much greater truth at the end of the day. Am I getting too heady?
No, it's freaking great. I mean, look, no. I think it's also, you're kind of reminding me of, just for folks out there who like sort of at the theories and things. I mean, I think what you just described gets at, you might know better than I do, but the theory or way of approaching dynamics in interpersonal dynamics is this an internal family system thinking.
Yeah.
Can you tell, do you know that? Do you mind?
A little bit. I mean, connected, though not totally in here, but internal family systems basically says that within yourself, you are made up of a bunch of different parts. And I'm not an expert, but that you're made up of a bunch of different parts with sort of one guiding self in there. But a lot of times the different parts inside of you feel opposing. Like part of the frame of therapy is to get to like know and acknowledge and accept all the different parts inside of you and know which parts are getting triggered at different times and the implications of that. And so I think it is a beautiful newer modality through which we're helping people think through their psychology and their relationship to themselves and to the world. And
right on. You also make me putting our frame back into sort of a life well lived, or what to do as on our way to death. For me, a lot recently, it's started to feel much more along these lines, like that all of these parts of us find some expression, or at least some sense of home within us. And I think this can another way of saying, like, hopefully before I die, I will learn to be not at odds with myself. Like that's a nice, I like a tidy aspiration. But also beyond that, that maybe all these bits of me have some air, some light, some expression, that I get to be all those things on some level in my life. That's where I think years can be helpful, that we can develop over time and express various parts of ourselves over time. And maybe why a younger death feels much harder, on the list of why a younger death feels harder. But anyway, yeah, just I guess my point here is not only to acknowledge these various folks inside of us, but to be interested in them, explore them, give them the microphone every once in a while.
Wouldn't it be beautiful if we could embrace like all of them, like, hey, let me give you again, easier said than done. There are some critters that live inside of me that, if I could tell them to shut up and leave me alone for the rest of my life, I would. And it's very hard for me to be like, hey, just the part of me that's petrified, come over here.
Right on.
Get a hug from mama.
Well, and this might be good. Shall we move on to the identity slide, and then we can
I think we kind of have.
Yeah, I guess we can. I think we kind of have. Right on. So, I guess one thing to say here, I guess like you said, we're heading into this. I think one way or another, we often land at this fluid sense of self. That this is a work in progress over time. Various people and circumstances summon different parts of ourselves too. So there'd be actively giving the mic to various parts of ourselves. But there's also, it doesn't need to be so, I don't know that it needs to be so, you don't have to assert these things necessarily, or these don't have to take the mic. But if you're paying attention in a life, a lot of these things ultimately are expressed in relationship. These are ultimately, and this is where dialectics, by the way, and I'm going to get quickly over my skis, but Niels Bohr and all the quantum guys were big Hegelians, were big dialecticians. And so that, something can be a particle and a wave. And what is simultaneity, and that what happens, what actually gets expressed at any one moment is a function of its relationship. There's a relational thing that pulls various pieces out of a particle, even out of ourselves. So like it could be like in a vacuum, I'm BJ, I am X, Y, and Z. I am not X, Y, or L, M, and Q. That's kind of, a lot of us, I think, spend a lot of time trying to figure out who we are by going inward. And there's that going inward is a point, but I think what I'm getting at here is who I am is at any one moment is a relational question. Who am I in the moment? Who am I with you, Dani? In conversation with you is a little bit different when I'm with my father or whatever, that you don't necessarily have to ram parts of yourself out in the world, except to be more like the note, I think, is to be open to moving with reality and being in relationship all the time to other people, to things, to your own thoughts, and that's what summons these different parts of us at any one time. That makes sense.
Yeah, and it's a good point. Like, even all of us here are people who sit with other people at times, and it's a good point. It's like, when we talk about dialectics, we're not saying that we have to give both airtime in the same moment, right? If somebody comes to you talking about how scared they are, that's what they're feeling that moment. We don't want you to say like, oh, and let's also, speak about hope right now. It's more that we create space for it. That somebody comes to me telling me about how scared they are, I can be so present with them. I can be so present with that. We can be in contact with fear. But in my head, that doesn't mean that I've decided that this person has no hope. It's that I'm holding the space for the fact that at different times, in different moments, hope always also exists as a part of this picture. It doesn't have to be the thing that we're looking at right now. It doesn't have to be the thing that we're touching right now. It's that I'm not going to hear your fear and pretend that that erases the fact that you sometimes have hope. I'm going to keep a spot for it at the table. Sorry.
No, that's right on. It's so beautiful. It's like we need, and there's Buddha's talk around this too. So there's Heidegger, there's philosophical talking about like negative space. You need space for something to summon the meaning, to summon the moment, to summon the feeling. So there's this dynamic of holding space. Every moment is filled with potential. There's this potentiality all the time that gets expressed in real time based on the relation. And so anyway, that holding spacing is really, really key, because then the rest of the work is a little bit more natural and fluid.
Totally. And then there's never a fear when you bring one piece of yourself.
Yeah.
That yourself or the other person will lose the other pieces just because you're sitting with one of them right now.
Yeah.
So I do find myself, I don't know about you, BJ, I find myself thinking like, is the audience jiving? Do they think we are like out of our minds in the clouds together right now? I do have this urge. I'm sure there's more that me and BJ have to say, but I do have this urge to hear from you guys. Are you jiving with this? Is this helpful? Is this totally heady? Like, where are you guys at? If anyone wants to unmute, I'd love to hear your voices. Some of my favorite people are here today.
Dani, that's funny. As you were saying that, I was just thinking like right before you said that, like, this is so good. This is so different.
You're
all
biased, girl.
And just not all over the place. That's the wrong thing to say. Like in a different zone than sorry.
Both all over the place and on point.
I apologize, but
no, it's not either all over the place and great. We can do it. We can hold both of those.
I wasn't even all over the place. I'm gonna try to take that one back. I'll edit that part out. But it is in this really beautiful philosophical space that I think is nice to add into our practical discussion. So I was finding myself just going like, yeah, during everything. So let's see what everyone else says too. All right, Vito, you have had your hand up
Vito.
quite a while.
Hi, Vito.
For being here. You may have to unmute on your end. Oh, let's see. There we go. Okay, you may have to unmute. Yep, there you are. Hi, Vito.
Vito, are you still there?
Vito.
Vito.
Vito, while I may go to a question here that we also had. One second, let me just mute this and then go over to this question. This person said, I have a question regarding the dialectic of living well, living with serious illness. It seems to me that living well is in large part resource dependent, meaning that the more resources, money, energy, intelligence, compassion, community that one has, the greater ability to live well with a serious illness. My question is, how can one enter that dialectic fully in an under-resourced situation, i.e. when one doesn't have what one needs?
Well, let's see here. I mean, my brain goes to that living well is itself a frame, and that it's, what does living well mean if not doing the best one can with whatever one has, and not to belittle under versus over resourced folks, but just to call into question, where's that standard? So by some standard, the resources that the least among us, at least in the Western world, has access to would dwarf what an emperor would have access to, 2,000 years ago in some level. So I think part of the answer has something to do with that relational frame, with what's available to you, what's possible, and that the living well component is really again, as a comment about doing what our best with what we have. I don't know that I believe what I'm saying, but that's where my brain goes.
Well, I mean,
yeah, please.
I'll add on, and I think this is a bit of a scary question to answer, if I'm totally honest with you, whoever asked this, because on the one hand, I want to completely validate what you are saying. Right? It is easier to live well with resource. And one of the single hardest parts of my job is working with people who society isn't taking care of them, right? They don't have a kid who's coming to take care of them. They don't have the money to have somebody come take care of them. They cannot access what I would even call is a decent ability to have quality of life in the setting of their illness, in the setting of the ways that our society does or doesn't support them, and it's very, very different from a patient who has a bunch of money and a bunch of family and a bunch of things that can be pulled in to let them find joy or meaning or whatever it is in that time. I cannot underscore enough how much I want to validate what you're saying. And getting at what BJ's saying, and there is a dialectic here because both are true. And I'm also finding myself thinking of like Viktor Frankl and Man's Search of Meaning, and this idea that even in the most dire of circumstances, we do have power, and we have power over our mindset. We have power over how we experience even terrible things. And so I think both are true and both can be cultivated. And so there's an ability within ourselves to cultivate a capacity to find meaning, beauty, good living, even in a dire situation. And we're dropping the ball as a society for people with serious illness. It's a lot harder if we don't have like the basic resources to help people. Not everybody has someone who can come into their house, and we need to do better. I don't know, BJ.
Right on. Thank you. I think yes. Thank you.
I'm going to answer with a dialectic. So, and I see that there's some questions in the chat, but also that Vito said, I'm here.
Yes, Vito, it's ready.
Can you hear me now?
There you are.
Yes.
You
Hi.
are.
Now you can hear me. Oh, okay. Hello, everyone, and a quiet hello to Sonia. And thank you for wanting so much to introduce me to BJ at the convening, who was speaking to me with his hands. And that was a really nice surprise. I thought he was all right before, but I had no idea he was Italian.
I wish.
Yeah. So I found out about metal when my video was just scrolling through stories on its own, and I heard this man speaking who had the logic. He thought in the same manner I did. It really felt like this sort of the syntax of his logic. And finally, I just walked over my phone and picked it up, and it was BJ talking about hospice, which didn't concern me, but he had a what I call a phoenix experience in his life, where everything just burns, your whole life just burns down completely through no fault of your own, and you just have to come back and maintain this laser focus, and you're kind of all on your own doing it, and that was just like spiritual glue to me. I when someone else has gone through that, it really resonates very deeply. And this discussion really resonates too. You were wondering if people listening would relate to it, and it's just perfectly timed for me, because I've had a Phoenix experience recently with my identity. My identity as a boy and a young man. On the good side of it, my identity, I always labeled myself as I had a high IQ, I got good grades without trying, I was placed in gifted and talented classes, I was well liked, by the kids at school. And it set me up feeling like I could do anything that I set my mind to. So I got a master's and went to a Big Ten university. I lived in Italy, because I love art, and I love architecture. So then I put myself through trade school, and I built a small apartment building all by myself. And I'm just fascinated with working with my hands, and semi-retired early, and like that was my identity. And then the dialectic part comes, where I started doing forgiveness work, which is very healing, but it's like lancing a wound or lancing an infection on your early pain. And it became vividly clear that I had a terrible start in life. I was shining too bright for the people of origin around me, and that made them feel inadequate. And developmentally, I couldn't understand that dynamic, that emotional dynamic. So they would undermine me every chance they could, and they were very cruel about it. Many of these people never graduated high school. And what was worse is that they were all older than me. So I looked up to them, and they were able to capitalize on that vulnerability to engage a lot of abuse. One sibling was dark triad. What dark triad people like to do is they isolate their victim. So they kind of circled their wagons around me. And at the time, the way I survived was to dissociate while the abuse was happening, and then denial. But denial, forgiveness dissolves that denial, and it's good. I mean, it's good that I did, engage in these psychological defenses at the time, because I'm pretty much unscathed by it. I'm sure not completely, but in the final analysis, now I'm stuck with these two different histories. It's like two completely different men, and it's not like they're conflicted. It's like they're disparate. And I just
and there's
I almost
in both of them.
Yeah, you said, like, now I have this container to put them in. When you were saying before, is anyone connecting to this? And I'm hugely connecting to this. This reminds me of when I was at the convening, and the very last speaker, I think it was Karen. It's Karen Shanky or something, talking. Which she was talking about. It was like just what I needed to hear, and it was wildly healing to me. And I went. There was this after party, and I went there on this high of I'm just, I'm in the right place. And so in the final analysis, I just want to say thank you for this discussion, because I have a lot of sifting to do to get through this. And I don't think it's a short road, but it's very, very helpful to me in terms of what you were saying, identity. I have this place. There can be two completely opposite things, and they can exist in me, and that's okay.
Thank you, Vito. And I appreciate, you speak to this idea that more than one truth can be true at once. And also just the idea that these journeys of self-discovery and self-awareness, they're not always easy, right? It's not always like a rose-colored path that we walk. It's a difficult journey to get through. And Sonia, I also see that we have now so many hands up, which is so exciting. We have lots of people.
And I'll just say thank you, Vito, too. And by the listeners, the convening he's referencing was our first event in August, and we're going to do those again. Vito, it was so lovely meeting you in person again. Thank you for your comments. One last thing is to also say, like, just how you gave yourself, like, the moment, that time summoned in you those defenses, that piece of you, and that's what you needed in that moment. And I love that's a very important piece of this, lest you look back on that with shame or why did I do that, or second guessing or something. So just beautifully relayed. Thank you, Vito. So
BJ, you're reminding me that I made it through a whole metal talk without talking about self-compassion. Did the word self-compassion come out of my mouth yet?
not yet.
We'll get there. We still got 6 minutes.
But yeah, let's get to those other hands.
Yeah, what do you think, Sonia? Because there's a lot of hands, and I also see that Karen asked a question in the chat that I have thoughts on, but I don't. Sonia, you lead the ship.
Okay, thanks, Vito. Yeah, let's get to this question from Karen, and then we can get to the hands. So the question is, how do you hold both things when one may be so much louder? Your example of fear and hope. Fear can easily override hope, hold it hostage. Do you ever orchestrate giving more airtime to one versus the other?
It's a really good question, because I think we're also just sometimes on some of these, we're predisposed to leaning very heavily, like some of us are way more disposed to despair and others of us to hope and things like that. I'm going to take this as an opportunity to talk about self-compassion. No, and grace, and just acceptance of the fact that some of us are, a little predisposed, a little wired to find one end of some dialectics a lot easier to be in contact with than the other. And so it's not like we jump from A to B and all of a sudden we're so in touch. It's just that awareness to create a little bit more space and a little bit more space to constantly be expanding the space that we have, in the hopes that one side is not so all-consuming that eventually it'll be, pleased enough that the other side can start coming in a little bit more. And I'll also put a plug as a psychiatrist, though, that sometimes we need help for this. So sometimes it's something we can cultivate in ourselves, and sometimes we do need a little bit of help for this. If it feels so skewed, like you're so consumed by fear, then it might be that someone can work with you to help create that space. BJ.
Right on. And I would just add too, I think there's a difference between noting one's feelings. So the track from the feeling to the reaction or the response, or what you do with the feeling. There's something for us here. I mean, so, just honestly, as you're saying, just honestly, the fear may just be drowning out everything else. That's just your observation of the feeling. But, and your own internal processing as you move from, okay, I feel you feeling, to what am I going to do about it, or where am I going to aim my actions? Where am I going to point myself? In other words, which voice am I going to listen to most closely? So maybe there's a moment of agency there and rejiggering of the proportions. And it does feel very much a matter of, like, because all this it's all in relation, it's therefore a matter of proportions. It's not whether or not you're afraid, it's how much, or what's the character, the quality of that fear. So just to say, yeah, I think proportions is a really good word for here. And you may have heard us talk about this idea of right sizing, and trying to right size my place within my own inner life, my own outer life. And I think that has something to do with how we hear and how we experience our feelings as step one, and then what we do with them. And that's where there's an opportunity, I think, to reallocate some of the proportions. I will just say, I've gotten on my own development, getting in touch with my feelings in the first place. has meant I just kind of give myself over to, I try to stay a little bit raw so that I don't overly edit or doctor, or, that I actually let these things be, at least as a starting place. That's led me to be act almost irresponsibly sometimes in the name of being raw, just so I can hear the emotion. Sometimes it has to be loud. So I've got my own work to do of what I do with these emotions, but that was a step en route to me figuring out what I feel in
But
the
it's
first.
true, BJ, like even like something like the example from the question, fear, if we try to like resist fear and look the other way, it often gets bigger.
It gets
So
louder.
sometimes the answer is to like lean into it, like go deeper in,
Yeah.
so that it can get quiet, get in contact with the greatest fear, learn
Yes.
that we can tolerate it and help quiet it out so the space opens up for the other side. But
Right on. And maybe it's
so
yelling
many hands.
louder. Oh yeah, go. Sorry. Yes, please.
I see Deb, I see Sarah, I see Karen.
And Dani, on that note, are you okay to?
I can stay.
Okay, then excellent. Then we're fine. So
Okay.
Karen, Deb, and Sarah, if you guys are okay to stay over a little bit, we can definitely get to your questions. And Karen, I'm going to start with you. You had your hand up first.
Sonia, thank you for unmuting, and Dani and BJ, great discussion. Thank you. And I'll try to, my voice is funky. I'll try to get three thoughts out, one of which was from diagnosis over 2.5 years ago of lung cancer. I worked so hard at compartmentalization and integration. And it took me forever to get over that and just go with integration, which is kind of a springboard to dialectics, maybe, I'm not quite sure. But the blessing of dialectics. So I can now say to others when they say, "Oh, you look great, how are you?" And I've worked hard on trying to get a more authentic response. So I now say something like, my cancer is probably the thing that will someday take my life, but I'm really healing beautifully. And I just, inside, I grit my teeth and I try not to worry about the reactivity, because I heard, I think, BJ, you said, we don't need to assert our identity or put it forward. And yet I just have to be able to find a way to let people know, I've got a lethal illness, but I'm okay. And I am healing. And sometimes I think I would rather hear the dialectic of healing and dying rather than living and dying, because it's just a good reminder that there's all kinds of good stuff going on too. And God, there's so much else in my mind, but just a last comment, because I was thinking about when there was that little discussion about being under-resourced, and my mind went to the image of the Kensuke hand. And I thought, in terms of being under-resourced, where does our gold come from? Where do we mine that gold that helps us to put ourselves back together? And that's a really organic process. And it might come from a family member or an oncologist or a cardiac surgeon. We don't know, but we might think we don't have the resources. But if we're able to dig a little more deeply, the gold is going to come from somewhere to help us kind of stick things back together. And I'm kind of wandering, but thank you for this wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it. Steve's here with me too. Okay, bye.
Thank you. I love it when Karen talks, because I never have a response. I'm always like, well, can't say it better than that. Like,
exactly.
it's always like so beautiful. So my response, as opposed to responding to any concrete thought in there, is just to say thank you. Like, thank you for adding those words to this discussion.
Yeah, and I'll add too. I think you're right, Karen, that I think the integration that you mentioned is a dialectic, is towards being all of the above at the same time. And I will say one more thing popped out too, just with language being such a force in all of this. And someone in the chat pointed out, Noha, you pointed it out beautifully, and it registered with me too. Karen, when you said something like, I have a lethal illness, but I'm okay. Noha's point here is that's importantly different from saying I have a lethal illness and I'm okay. So, not to be too pedantic, but you can do yourself a favor simply oftentimes by changing the and to a but, or the but to an and when it's honest. It's just a little trick. So thank you, Noha, and thank you, Karen, as always. We're so lucky that you're part of this metal world. Thank you.
Yeah. Deb, gonna unmute.
Yeah.
Deb, thank you.
Hey, DJ, I love
Hi,
you.
Deb.
Yeah, so I'm not as clear-minded as Karen. I have like a bunch of things going through my mind here. It was a beautiful discussion. And I guess I wanted to bring up a couple things of just like you talked at the beginning about the, pathologizing things. But I think that there's another level of like just in our society, like even within the spiritual paths, it's like higher vibration, lower vibration. There's so much judgment around where we're at all the time. And we have that judgment within ourselves. And I find inside of myself too, some of it is actually just like, yeah, I don't like to be angry because I don't like how it feels to be angry. So it's like, and I also see that as like, well, I want to be this other more open-hearted person. And so it's hard to feel that kind of closing down because it just doesn't feel as good. So I guess I just wanted to bring out how much that way of thinking, at least in my world and the people I'm around, have that kind of judgment about just about everything. So I think it's so important, this discussion and the way that you all are talking about it. And I also wanted to bring up something because you both mentioned movement. I heard the word movement a couple times, and like in Sufism, the actual spiritual practices are usually done in pairs of dialectics, specifically so that they create movement. So you're not stuck in one or the other. And it, you can go back to the breath, contraction, expansion, both and the waves coming in, the waves going out in the ocean. I mean, day and night, all of that, those kinds of things, I think are it's almost like if you call them up together, everything shifts, everything moves. And that movement is what helps us to get unstuck. So that's, yeah, that's
Thank you for that. And thank you. Even like my whole body is, after I took that breath with you, is feeling more mellow. But I think you reconnected us to something that we maybe didn't touch on today, which is like the dialectics in nature, right? The dialectics in the universe and in the natural world. And it's almost like embedded in the nature of existence. And so thank
absolutely
you for bringing us there. And thank you also for speaking to like, gosh, the pull to judge is fierce.
Ooh.
It's fierce. It is powerful. I don't know how much of it is learned. I don't know how much of it is innate, but we all go there. And for these pieces of ourselves that we don't like as much, it's hard to cultivate the love for them.
Yeah. And I think too, like, well, I'm going to tell the story. I tell BJ this all the time. Every session, I remind him of something he did in one of the very first sessions we had, which was when, I was expressing something that was a hard thing for me, and I didn't really want it. And I was trying to like work it in a more spiritual kind of way of like, I'll acknowledge this and then it'll be in my awareness. And then it kind of changes, the Tara Brach rain kind of model or whatever. And I was playing with all of that. And BJ just looked at me and he's like, or you could just say, that's part of me too. And it was just like this light of like,
So
oh
liberating.
my God, 40
Yeah.
years of trying to be different and to struggle and to be something that I'm not. And like that complete honesty of like, wow, I can just own that little funky thing in me is there. So it was profound, and I go back to it a lot. So I thank you, BJ. I thank you, Dani, for this
Sorry.
whole conversation and being able to just embrace ourselves. I won't use the same words you use, Dani, but yeah, just embrace all parts of ourselves and allow that movement and know that, yeah, I mean, just like I say, the Sufi practices, you actually call it up so that it actually just kind of moves. You call them both in. So love you guys.
Deb, man,
It's a
thank
mutual love.
Yeah, so much. I love you so much, Deb. Thank you. And I would say, like, as always with our time together, I'm learning with you. These are reminders too. Like, I wish this whole talk, I can't remember. It's not that long ago in my life that I realized what you're saying here, Deb, that we get to be both. The whole nature of this conversation is relatively new to me as an adult. I really kept trying to ram myself into one or the other all the time. Am I happy or am I sad? And judgment.
Am I a good kid or am I a bad kid?
Yeah, exactly. All of it. And so anyway, just to say, thank God. I wish if this could undo a lot. This is basic concept could unlock a lot of ease and shut down a lot of unnecessary pain if we got this memo earlier in life. If I had, certainly.
Yep.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
Deb, thank you so much, girl. And Dani, yeah, anything else you want to say?
Oh, like so much, but I also feel like I shouldn't, because I see that Sarah's hand is still up. But just like, I agree, these are powerful things, and I built an identity on being, a good kid, and goodness, wouldn't it have been nice if I had built an identity that was okay with, the darkness and all the other things that were inside of me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sarah, thank you so much for waiting patiently. You may just.
I think I'm here. Am I here?
Yay!
Okay, so I actually realized it was my question about being under-resourced in that dialectic between serious illness and living well. And I realized as Dani was talking that I sort of she was giving me back the answer to my question, which I probably had for a long time without realizing it. And I'll just explain what I'm talking about. When Dani was talking about, having to work with all these people who are under-resourced, I realized, hey, I used to do that too. I ran an AIDS service organization that I founded for people who were very ill and had nothing and had no one. Those were my clients. And I had 100 of them, and I had 100 volunteers dealing with those clients and helping them. And people used to always ask me, how can you do this work? These people need so much, and you can't start to meet all these needs. And my answer was so simple that I whenever I entered one of these situations, my goal was A, to understand it and show some empathy and compassion, but 2, to pick one thing I could make better in that moment for that person and do it, to provide it, whether it was a meal or a ride or a birthday cake or a present or a visit or, some help with their house, whatever it was that we could offer, to offer it, and also, of course, make sure it happened after it was offered. But the secret to really those under-resourced situations and having to live in them, whether for myself at this moment or for other people, is just being willing to enter it and doing that one thing in that moment that will make things a little better for that person. And I just want to thank Dani for making that light bulb go off in my own head about that. So I really, really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah, for it was like such a beautiful and important question to pose. And thank you also for the work that you've done in your lifetime. And I think as you're speaking, it's making me think of like, sometimes in some of these situations that seem so desperate, there's an impulse to look the other way, because it's really hard to tolerate seeing the injustice and seeing the suffering. And I think you're speaking beautifully to like, one of the first steps is that we can't look the other way. We have to like be with it. And maybe we can't fix it all, but like we can't look the other way. We have to be with it and lean in where we can. And just really appreciate your voice today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Karen offered a beautiful response, just as you're saying that, Dani, too, which is we can always offer radical listening. That's right. We can witness, we can be with, even if we can't change it. And in some ways that changes it. Yeah.
That's a nice way to close out the session. Thank you, Dani, BJ, for going over.
No, I don't want to end.
Thanks for being here with us, everyone. It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you both so much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Happy weekend, everyone.
Happy weekend. Thank you, Dani.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.